Aloha, everybody, and welcome to Inside Times. I'm Cynthia White, Training Coordinator of Kids Hurt 2 Hawaii. This is Hiro Ito, Program Director of Kids Hurt 2 Hawaii. He had a tooth extraction just yesterday, and so he's not talking a whole lot right now, and may fall asleep, just kidding. But he wanted to join us because he wants to learn too. So we're going to be covering the topic today of grief in children, but also we're going to look at the differences between grief and trauma. What I want you to know, first of all, is we call this Inside Times because these are times that we've had to spend in time, inside. and these will end in time. But until we all are safe and able to be outside of our homes and stay well, we will continue to be inside. We are lifting some of those restrictions and able to go out a little bit more starting tomorrow, according to our governor here in Hawaii. It's kind of a personal choice for everybody, whether you go out or not. How you feel about whether you can stay safe. Personally, I don't feel safe, and this is such a horrible illness and a horrible way to die. I never want to die that way. I mean, I know we don't always get to choose when or how we die, but this is certainly one thing I feel like I can do to protect myself, protect my mother. Hiro's been very protective of both of us and very, very careful when he goes out, because he does most of the going out and we do most of the staying in.
Too much.
So Inside Times is an opportunity for you to learn about grief and trauma as it relates to children. I also want to talk to you a little bit today about the services of Kids Hurt 2 Hawaii and what we do here. But let's get started. Thank you for your patience and waiting. We are going to move into our PowerPoint now, and let me get set up. Our technical problems are a little bit less now, and so we can move right along. So children, as you probably know, are our most vulnerable population. Here's a real scary statistic. Nearly 700,000 children are victims of abuse and neglect, and that was in 2018. It may be much higher this year because of all the stress that we're under. I hate to think that, but unfortunately, it's a sad reality. 3.4 million investigations about children's well-being happen every year.
In the U.S.
And that's a lot. That is a lot of concern for our children. Many of us were victims in our own childhood. Many of us adults are victims in our own childhood, or we've had losses from childhood on. Some people have had many losses. Some people have had, like, in just recent times, as you know, multiple losses within their family. And that's just really shocking and hard. Again, children are our most vulnerable population. The younger victims are more at risk. The younger the child, the more at risk they are. So this is why Kids Hurt 2 Hawaii exists, because we have to protect our children. So we provide services to children ages 3 to 19 and youth 16 to 24. So, maybe we can't prevent domestic violence, victimization of children, loss of family members, but we can certainly provide resources that will help children to cope with those difficult situations. Kids Hurt 2 Hawaii provides peer support and mentoring activities. Let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. oh dear, oops, there we go. Find the little thing. So, our peer support programs are loss-specific groups. We also provide case management for child victims and their family. We provide a safe place where healing and adaptation can happen. And if you saw the previous lectures on trauma, you know that safety is the number one most important factor in healing trauma. And so that's our priority, is making a safe place for children to come and do the healing work and work through the losses in their lives. There we go. Our programs connect other families who've had similar experiences, so they come together, support one another. Many of them become friends outside of our program, and those friendships last for a very long time. There. Kids Hurt Too provides services for over 300 children a year. That's not enough. We're trying to do more, and with your help, by making a donation, we can do more. So thank you in advance. Our mentoring activities include Surf for the Soul, which is about learning to never give up. They learn to surf, which teaches them about never giving up. We have Poi for the Soul, where they learn Hawaiian values, but also taking care of Taro is about taking care of one another. We do community and cultural engagement, so we partner and collaborate with a whole lot of other organizations around the island that provide services to children and families. And we help get them involved in those services so that they can benefit, learn new skills to build their sense of self, connect them with local resources, and enhance their social skills. We provide training and education, like Inside Times, but we also do our facilitator training, because most of our programs are facilitated by volunteers. And so we train them in how to work directly with grieving and traumatized children. And we have crisis interventions after violent deaths. In the past 2 years, we've been a recipient of Victims of Crime Act, which has allowed us to reach more families and to provide them with those case management services. Kids Hurt Too also does High Rising, which is a workforce development project. It's a social enterprise with a mission to provide young adults 16 to 24 aging out of the foster care system or a participant in Kids Hurt Too Hawaii services with an intensive business skills training and life skills development coaching. And we have a boutique or a shop in our building where the young people come and have actual work experience, and that helps them to become more employable, as well as learning about how to get a job and helping them find a job and connecting them with other employers in the community. So Kids Hurt Too Hawaii today's presentation is on a quantum model for working with grieving, traumatized, and victimized children. If I seem a little bit nervous, it's because I am. Because this model is based on my book that will be coming out soon called Everything That Happens Is Right. And that is about a quantum model for working with children who are grieving or traumatized. And it's an energy model. So let me just get right into it. And we'll talk about, first of all, the fact that grief and trauma are different. Are you having a little trouble seeing there, Hiro?
No, just like our kids.
Oh yeah, these are some of the children. Okay, so grief and trauma are different. Let's talk about that. Trauma is a destructive consequence of a perceived life-threatening event that overwhelms coping mechanisms, but grief is a natural and healthy reaction that affects the whole person. It is a part of you. It affects you, but it is not your whole self. Trauma is a biochemical response that affects how the body functions. It is potentially damaging to the brain and stress response system. But grief is how we respond to loss, and loss is change. Grief is an energy that is transformative and generates an altered state of consciousness, and I'll say more about that later. Trauma is an injury, and it needs therapeutic intervention as soon as possible. The best therapies for trauma are group therapy, play therapy, and art therapy. And the energy around trauma is chaotic. And I'll say more about energy as we move along. Grief is an adaptation. It's how we change. It needs support, not therapy. And the best interventions are continuing bonds, peer support, and joining. And joining is a skill that we use in our quantum model, which I'll talk about next week. The energy is organized with grief. But anytime you have trauma as well as grief, you're going to have more of a chaotic energy. So Harold's going to be responding to any questions or comments that come along. So you kind of have to watch it in a different mode.
James watching, Mary's watching.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, Lily-san's watching from Japan.
Great.
Pianist.
So let's get into a quantum model for grief work. In this model, grief is defined as a transformative energy, not a stage. And if you remember last week, I talked about that in the past, grief is often defined as a stage, phase, or task. And then it's moved into the continuing bonds model, but I have moved it forward even more and brought it into the age of quantum physics. So we talk about it in terms of energy. Grief worker focuses on the exchange of energy, bringing awareness to the interactive nature of reality. The purpose is to facilitate change. That is the purpose of grief work. We facilitate change. Facilitate means to make easy. Change is not easy, as you all well know, because we're going through so many changes with the stay-at-home orders and the threat of this virus. We're going through so many changes, so you know the change is not easy. To facilitate means to make easy. So the purpose of this work is to make it easy, to adapt, to make those changes. I think we all need some grief work. There are 4 concepts in the quantum model for grief work. Unconditional love. That's my favorite. Interactive participation. Consciousness as the creator of. And energy and transformation. So we're going to talk about these 4 items separately. Unconditional love. Let's talk about that one first. We're shifting from a interpreting position to observing. Interpreting is not what we do in grief work model, in the quantum model. We observe. We focus on the energy rather than the content. So it's not necessarily what children are saying and doing, but the energy with which they are saying it or doing it. And we focus on that energy. In the unconditional love approach, everything that happens is right. That's the title of my new book. In the book, you'll understand why I titled it that. But that means that we may not understand what is happening. We may not agree with what is happening. But as long as it's safe, then it's right. And it's what the child needs. And that's what we focus on, and that's what we support. We change from defining grief to participating in the experience as closely as possible. And as you saw last week, many of the models that we've used over the past 100 years have been pretty much a defining grief model. We tell people what their grief is. We tell people how they grieve. We were telling people the stage, phase, or tasks they needed to do. But in this model, we focus on the experience, and we don't try and define it. We try to participate. Excuse me, we try to participate. There's my nerves again. So in unconditional love approach, by describing, we want you to understand that by describing or interpreting anything about nature, you lose a certain degree of contact with it. So when you interpret, you're standing on the sidelines telling somebody what you think about what they're doing. But when you participate, you're in there. You're with them. You're going with them on this grief journey. Just as in Taoism, you follow the flow of nature. You understand that grief is in our nature. It is natural to grieve. And we want to follow the flow of a person's grieving process. Not tell them how to grieve or what stage they're in, but rather accompany them so we flow with them. You work directly with experience. Experience is all we really have. It's here and now. Unconditional love is often and probably only communicated through the exchange of energy, not words. It's not what you say. It's the energy that you bring to what you say or to a relationship or a connection with somebody that communicates unconditional love. Mm-hmm. The second component, interactive participation. What we experience is not external reality, but our interaction with it, according to Gary Zukav. The basic stuff of the universe is an interactional relationship process between everything involved in observation. We're always in an interactional process. Everything is about our interactions, not only with each other, but with nature, the world around us. We're all interactively participating in this life. Even when we're home alone or in quarantine, we're still participating. We are dealing with experience. That's a key component. And you can only have an experience in the moment, not in the past, not in the future, only in the here and now. So we're dealing with what's happening right now, right here. The experience of the person, not what we want them to experience, but what they are experiencing. Any attempt to describe or define grief removes it from the realm of experience, so it becomes something it is not. So anytime we try and define or describe something, we disconnect from it a little bit, and then it becomes something it is not. So it's very important to stay focused on the experience. When you focus on the experience itself, flowing with its energy, something emerges into consciousness that has the distinction of being uniquely right for you in that moment. And that's all we have, is the moment. The third component is consciousness as the creator of reality. Consciousness is a tricky thing. I have to say, I've studied consciousness a lot, and a lot of people have, and we're still not sure that we understand what it is or if it even exists. But I'm going to try to give you some information today about consciousness that may bring you to more consciousness about consciousness.
That's philosophical.
It's very deep. So in quantum theory is about the here and now. It even encounters the essence of our humanity, our consciousness. Consciousness is what makes us different from animals, from plants. We have a consciousness. Human beings have a consciousness. The goal of grief work is to provide children an experience of being real or being conscious of their existence. If you remember anything about the Velveteen Rabbit and that story, the Velveteen Rabbit becomes real because he is unconditionally loved. And he just wants to be real, a real rabbit. But he finds that what makes him real is unconditional love. And I think when children come into a grief support program like Kids Hurt Too, they begin to sense that there is unconditional love everywhere around them, that we're all bringing that to them. And that brings them into more consciousness about their own existence, and they begin to feel real. A lot of times trauma and grief disconnects us from our own bodies, from our feelings, from each other. It kind of brings us into this state of unreality, not feeling real. but unconditional love helps us to become more conscious and therefore feel that we are alive, that we are here, that we're real. There are different states of consciousness. Talk about this crazy thing that consciousness is. Your state of consciousness affects how you experience reality. There are different states of consciousness, and grief itself is an altered state of consciousness through which energy interacts with matter to transform reality. Shall I say that again? Grief is an altered state of consciousness through which energy interacts with matter to transform reality. I'll explain that a little bit more. And of course, in my book, I go into a great deal more depth about these concepts. Let's look at the states of consciousness. In the first state of consciousness, the storyteller is primary. We call that consensus reality, or in my book, I call it information consciousness. We're focused on the information. The storyteller is telling the story. I often use an example of religion, because a lot of people know about Christianity and religion, and so I use that as an example. Please forgive me if I offend anyone's spirituality, but it's just an example. So in consensus reality, the person is talking about Christ. Christ came into the world and was born, and the Son of God, and became our Savior, and we're telling the story about Christ. So the storyteller is primary. When the storyteller becomes secondary, that's an altered state of consciousness, or an experience consciousness is how I call it. And basically the storyteller is talking about their experience of Christ. And Christ came into my life, and I felt saved, and I felt that love. And so they're talking about their experience in the moment. They're not talking about the story of Christ. They're talking about their experience of Christ. There's also extreme states, and in extreme states of consciousness, the storyteller is absent. I am Christ. There's no storyteller. I am Christ. So that's an extreme state. And then with coma and death, we don't really know. The storyteller is absent there too. So these are different states of consciousness that we can identify and think about. But we're going to focus on altered states or experience consciousness. That's something you're all familiar with. And that is what you experience when grief is active. You experience an altered state of consciousness. Well, think for a moment. Has anybody that's watching today ever fallen in love? And do you remember that feeling of how, I couldn't wait to see you, and every day that we were apart felt like a week, and every minute we were together felt like a second. And sorry, I'm making you smile. And and when you're in love, that's an altered state of consciousness. And grief is kind of like that. And here's how. The characteristics of an altered state of consciousness are it connects to the eternal. That's why it feels like forever when you're apart, and like time changes. How you experience time changes. A minute can seem like a second, or a day can seem like a minute, or a day can seem like a week. And when just our whole experience of time changes when you're in an altered state of consciousness. And the same is true with grief. I hear a lot of grieving people say, I don't want to go into it. I don't want to go into my loss, because if I do, I'll never come out. I don't want to start crying, because if I do, I'll never stop. They have that sense of that this will be forever, because in an altered state of consciousness, you connect to the eternal. You connect to the foreverness experience. And so it feels like you'll never stop. It's a subjective experience that opens a person to change. When you're in an altered state, you're open to change. And honestly, we enjoy altered states. We seek altered states. It's not unusual for us to want to have altered states. That's why we drink too much, or people take drugs, or we go
I'm out
jogging.
of
You get a
state.
what?
I'm out of the state now.
You're in. It's like on
Then.
medication,
My medication.
so it's a little altered for him, in not a happy way though. Running. Sometimes you get runner's high. You know, we do a lot of things. Meditation, yoga. We do a lot of things to change our state of consciousness out of the information consciousness to the experience consciousness, to get out of that everyday reality into something deeper and more meaningful for ourselves. And that is what an altered state of consciousness opens us up to. Einstein said it better. Everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy. This is physics. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about physics. But some of you may have read or seen the show called The Secret. Well, that's what The Secret is about. It is about this fact. Grief is an energy. The law of conservation of energy says the form and availability of energy may change, but the total amount of energy remains constant. I call it a quantum model because we're going to talk a lot about energy. Grief is an energy. And so we have to understand a little bit about energy. The form and availability of energy may change, but the total amount of energy remains constant. Everything you do influences the entire universe by using and transforming energy. Grief is the energy for change. It is a potential energy or an active energy. So grief is always available to us. We can't grieve 24/7, although I know in the early agony of losing a loved one, it may feel like you're grieving 24/7. But our body can't do that, especially for children. But it remains a potential energy. It's always available to us. And then it becomes active when something triggers it. So let's talk a little bit about that. Potential energy. Example, if you overeat, the energy in food is not burned, but is stored as potential energy in fat cells. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at you when I said that. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
I just have a pain.
You just have pain. Now, active energy is an example is stored energy, the potential energy in a flashlight's batteries becomes light, active energy when the flashlight is turned on. So we always have this energy available to us, the energy of grief, the energy of transformation. It's always available, but it's not always active. It's a potential. When it becomes active, it's usually because something has triggered it, and coming to a peer support group for children who've had a loss is going to activate that energy. We have found that the children, even thinking about coming to Kids Hurt Too, will activate their energy. And this allows families to talk with their children before group, because then they start to have that conversation. Or we hear parents say they want to know, is this group night? Is this group night? Or children don't let their parents forget that when group night is. We even had one story of a I think, was he 10 years old boy, might have been 9, who his father was very frustrated, and because he had to fight him to do his homework, had to fight him to get his shower, had to fight him to do his chores, except on group night. And when the dad got home to pick him up and go to group, he'd done his homework, he did his chores, he'd taken a shower, and he was at the door ready to go, say, come on, I don't want to be late. Well, that says a lot. I was like, wow. So you know that this means something to children when it's that important to them to be there. So that energy becomes active sometimes even before they get there, but certainly when they are there, what they're doing is about their grief. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. So when that energy becomes active, then we want to facilitate that change, that transformation of energy. And we have some specific skills for that, which I'll talk about next week. You don't want to miss next week's episode. But today, I'm just going to talk about this model. How do we know where the energy is moving? That's something to ask. How do we know? Where is the energy? Once it becomes active, it has to move. Energy has to move. So how do we know where it's moving? First of all, you are a whole person. You're a whole person. You may play many different roles in life. You may be a mother, daughter, sister, friend, worker, father, son, husband, employee. You have many roles that you play in life, but you are a whole person, and those roles are not your whole self. They are a part of you. The energy affects different parts of your wholeness. So what does a whole person look like? Well, that's what a whole person looks like. But let's talk about the different parts of our wholeness, because there are many different parts. I know it's not a perfect whatever.
As a pizza.
Part of our wholeness includes emotions. And one of the things, we've learned about emotions is that when you're grieving, any emotion you can have can be an emotion of grief. We used to think that our emotions were, when you're grieving, were just sadness, anger, guilt. I mean, we just really had this very narrow range of emotions that were allowed or associated with grief. But we've learned from children over the years that any emotion, even joy, because we had one child share that when he came to the group and he thought about his dad, it made him sad. But after coming for a while and he talked and thought about his dad, it made him smile because he was able to remember the happy times. Mm-hmm. So even joy, being happy, can be the emotion of grief. It's, part of our wholeness is our thinking selves. Energy of grief can move through emotions. It can also move through our thinking. I noticed that a lot of people change their thinking while they're grieving. When their grief is active, how they think changes. It's more difficult to learn. Teens often say it changes what's important to them. Adults often talk about how, they just don't think about mundane things like they used to, that things become less important than they used to be. So how we think about things changes, and the way that we think changes. And that's when grief is active. The energy of grief is moving through parts of our wholeness. Grief, when it's active, affects our physical body. This is an area, behavior in our physical body is an area in which children primarily move the energy of their grief. So their physical body, we have symptoms. Children often talk about having heartaches, headaches, stomach aches, arm aches. It can be any part of their body. And, they tend to have a lot more physical symptoms as a result of trauma or grief because it affects our physical body. So grief energy can move through the physical body, and primarily for children, you're going to see a lot of physical symptoms when that energy is moving through their physical body. And when we talk about moving the energy out of the body, because if it doesn't move out of the body, then it'll go into the organs of the body. Mm-hmm. And I'll say more about that later. There's also a spiritual aspect to us, and I think about spirituality in terms of that part of us that connects to everyone else, that makes us feel like we're part of everything around us. That to me is, our spirituality is what helps us to feel connected to everyone and everything. And that, there's different aspects of spirituality, but for many grievers their spirituality is affected. Some people get angry at God. Some people feel closer to God. So it's different for everyone, but these are different parts of our wholeness through which energy can move. It can also move through our social life, our relationships. We hear teens often talk about they don't have the same friends anymore because they realized who their real friends were when people pulled away after their loss, and other people came closer. Often widowed people talk about feeling like a third wheel because they have a lot of couple friends, but they don't have a couple anymore because the spouse has died, and so that becomes uncomfortable. People pull away, or our relationships are affected and change as a result of active grief. And behavior, of course. What we do, how we act, these are affected by the active energy of grief, especially in these two areas. Physical and behavior are where we're going to see children moving that energy primarily. There are two characteristics of active grief energy, and we're going to be focusing on them as it relates to children. It's probably true for everyone, but we're focused on children at Kids for Two Hawaii. So grief energy, first of all, is activated by a context. So that's like our environment. A context kind of defines how we dress, how we think, what we do. For example, when you go to work, you don't wear your pajamas because that would be out of context, of course, unless you're working at home like most of us, and then you can wear your pajamas and work. The context is often determined by what you focus on, too. So what you focus on, though, is a reflection of yourself. So the context shapes what you focus on, and what you focus on is a reflection of yourself. Okay? So one aspect of the energy of grief is when it is active, we call it big energy. So this is where it breaks down from the more complex concepts to the simple concepts that I feel like are very easy to understand. We call it big energy. Why do we call it big energy? Because the energy moves through the large muscles, the big muscles. Urgh. Now, there are two qualities in big energy that I have observed in children over the years. Doesn't mean they're the only ones or just the only ones I've noticed. Maybe some of you have noticed others. But those two qualities are that when the energy moves through the large muscles, the child needs to have an effect. You kick a ball and it moves. You punch a window and it breaks. You punch a kid and he goes down. So there's an effect. There's something that happens when that energy is released through those large muscles. And we provide children with a safe way of expressing big energy. They don't often have this in other areas in their life. Often schools don't provide safe places for releasing big energy except for the playground or maybe PE. And not everybody has big energy. Sports is always a good way, but there are different qualities. The other quality is resistance. So when the energy is released from the big muscles, the child needs to have a sense of equal and opposite reaction. So this child, they'll lift a heavy weight, they'll punch a wall instead of a window, they'll pick a bigger kid to punch, they'll push. They need to have a sense of resistance. So we often train our volunteers to recognize, is the child, when they're releasing big energy, do they want to have an effect or do they want resistance? So I also recommend activities for children. One for an effect is any ball sport, baseball, football, basketball, because you throw a ball, something happens. You kick a ball, something happens. But for resistance, it's a little harder, but surfing is a good one. Swimming, climbing, wrestling, those are resistant. What?
Tug of war.
Tug of war, exactly.
So-
Those are resistant kind of activities. So redirecting big energy into safe expressions is a key component to working with children who are grieving and showing their and expressing their grief through big muscles. The other characteristics of big energy. Let's talk about that. First of all, they're loud. Big energy children are loud. Their clothes are even loud. Sorry, that's just a side note. They move all the time. You can't ask a big energy child to sit still, because if you ask them to sit still, then it just feels like their nervous system is being pulled as far as it'll go and to the breaking point. And the only relief from that sensation in their body is movement. They have to move. These are the kids who can't sit still in their classroom. These are the kids who get services because they get in trouble because of moving too much, and they can't sit still, and they get to see the counselor, and they can't stay at their desk. You know, they need a lot of movement. So you have to provide them with opportunities and resources for movement using their large muscles. And these are the kids that get attention. I said that. And these children will choose large muscle activities. So when they come into Kids Hurt 2, they have lots of options for different activities to play, and they will choose the activity that matches their muscles, their need to move that energy. Now, when you're around energy, everybody has energy. You know, we all have energy. You can kind of sense it around people. You ever walk into a room and you know, you're feeling really good, and then you're like, uh-oh, something's wrong. You feel the energy in the room. Or you're in a really bad mood, and you get around somebody, and suddenly you're laughing and joking because their energy is shifting you. So we all have an energy we feel that affects other people, and other people have energy that affects us. Even locations have energy. Our island has the best energy I've ever felt anywhere I've ever lived. I came here and I immediately felt welcome, invited, cared about. It was just getting off the plane, I felt that. Nobody said anything to me, I just felt it. It was the energy of our islands. So even places have energy. So when a child has big energy, the effect it tends to have on the adults and others around them is that you get this feeling of, oh, they're being aggressive, they're dangerous, or this is really intense, this child is intense. That's just the effect it has on you. It's important to be aware of the effect, but not to treat the child based on your reaction to their energy. You don't want to do reaction, you want to do participation. So if a child has big energy, what do? You
Join.
match their energy. That's right. We call that skilled joining. So we'll go into that in great detail next week. So I hope you tune in.
Next week.
Now, the other quality of energy in children when they have active grief is small energy. And why do I call it small energy? Because the energy is moving through the small muscles. Children will choose activities that engage the small muscles. Sand play, house play, drawing, listening,
That's
reading, sanding their cool wood activities. So energy will move through the small muscles. Characteristics of small energy. Children with small energy are very quiet. They don't move very much. They're still. They're almost invisible. They become so quiet, and their energy is so small that they can come into a room and you don't know that they're there, or they can leave a room and you don't know they're gone. So it's very important to work on staying aware and participating with small energy. Interactive participation. You want to Stay there. A lot of times I found that people were like, oh, that child is fine. They're quiet. They're sitting still. They don't, they don't need anything. That's not true. They probably need more than the big energy children because they're so quiet, because they're so still. But they need you to be quiet and still with them. They don't want to become invisible. It's just their energy is so quiet that many people tend to ignore them and think they're okay. But they're actually at more risk than kids with big energy because they don't get the services. And they will choose small muscle activities. Now, the effect that small energy has on you, on the observer, is that you get this sense of the child is communicating, leave me alone, go away, don't talk to me. And so people will go away, but never go away. You have to force yourself to stay engaged, to stay with them and be with them quietly and just observe and stay connected. Continue to participate in their energy by being still and quiet with them. We often tend to follow our inner effects rather than just notice, oh, that's interesting, and then stay with what's in front of us, with what's happening in the moment. So in our model, in this model, we have to stay with what's happening in the moment and be present with the children. You have awakened when you realize you create your reality through the energy of your consciousness. So you get to create your reality. Think about, do you have big energy? Do you have small energy? What is your grief like? And part of our training when we work with facilitators and we train them on how to work with children is to give them an opportunity to get in touch with their own energy. You can think back to yourself as a child and think, what kind of play did you engage in? Was it big energy? Was it small energy? How did other people respond to you when you had big energy or when you had small energy? So it's not too hard to recognize that you have an energy too. And when you realize that you create your reality through the energy of your consciousness, then your experience can become deeper. So thank you for listening to my presentation today. If anybody has any questions, we can answer any of the questions that may have come up. Again, we're presenting on the quantum model for grief work with children that will be given in more detail in my book when it comes out. Which I can't tell you when that's going to happen. It's really kind of almost 90% done, and it's just a little bit further to go before I'm finished. So are there any questions today,
No.
Hiro?
I see the Donna's watching,
Oh, hi,
and
Donna.
Lily-san, and James, and facilitator. Sayaka-san from Japan is watching. And
Thank you
Uchi's
all for
always
tuning
watching.
in to Inside Times. We'd love to answer your questions. As a matter of fact, next week I'm going to be presenting on the skills that we use to work with grieving children and in this model. And after that, I would like to invite anyone who wants to come on Inside Times and join us, because we can actually have people join us through Facebook Live and we can talk together, or you can share your experience or your knowledge. So I'm hoping that some of you will contact me over the next couple of weeks and let me know if you'd be willing to come on the show and share with others as well. Because really, we've shared a lot of information, we've covered a lot of ground. This is a lecture series, but as we move forward, I'd really like to hear from other people, and I get more out of learning from others and being with others and being with children than I do just giving information. I think the information is important. I get excited about the information. I care about the information, that you all have it and you understand more about the children around you and are able to be present and available to them. Thank you for listening today.
Also, if you're interested in being a facilitator,
That's
this is
right.
part of
You
the
know,
training.
right. This is part of our training. Probably doesn't hurt to go over it one more time, but there's more. There's practicing the skills, facilitation skills, group work skills, group theory. There's a whole lot more about how to work with children that goes into the training. It's a 4-day training, so that's a big commitment, and we understand that sometimes that's hard for people. There is a nominal fee that we charge just to cover the cost of providing the training. And if you want to become a facilitator, if you want to take the training just for your own professional development, then the fee's a little bit higher. So, just let us know. We have sign up. You can contact me at training@kidshurt2hawaii.org. At kidshurt2.org. Training@kidshurt2.org. So we leave off the Hawaii to make it shorter. Kidshurt2.org, at kidshurt2.org. There's hero@kidshurt2.org, training@kidshurt2.org.
No, hero at this one.
So there's sign up to become a volunteer. I'll tell you the truth though. Learning the skills and taking the training is just the beginning of your learning. The real learning and the real meaning in the work comes through interacting with children. They show you everything you need to know about how to support grieving children. And that's the real training. That's when learning really, really happens. I want to say thank you to all the people who have been volunteers over the past 20 years, who've worked with us, and the thousands of children that we've been able to support over the years. And we want to thank you all so much because you've been so important to what we do. None of this could have been done without the help of our volunteers. We have volunteers who've been involved for 10, 12 years. We have some who just started before COVID-19 happened, and now we're all on break, and so I'm sure they're anxious to get started. We're doing online groups right now, so our facilitators are having a chance to participate in our online groups as well. And it's kind of good to get back in the saddle and get back in there supporting children that we love so much, and it's such a meaningful work. I've done this work for 37 years, and I've never grown tired of it. I love it. It's just, magical when you see children come into their own sense of consciousness, that realize they are here, that they are alive, that they're real. You see that spark come back in their eye. You see the cheeks get all rosy. There's nothing more fulfilling than when a child wakes up to their own realness. Yeah. So thank you all for joining us. Please consider becoming a volunteer, and we hope to hear from you, and hope that you're able to support Kids Hurt 2. If you can't become a volunteer, we certainly can use funds to keep moving forward and providing services, and we'd like to reach more children with your help. We can only do it with your help. So thank you for joining us today, and aloha.
Okay, thank you.